On the afternoon of January 11th, 2023, in the quiet town of Waller County, Texas, a chilling 911 call shattered the calm. Rodney Diaz, frantic and barely able to speak, informed the operator that his daughter-in-law, Angie Diaz, was dead. But the details that followed were far more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. Rodney's voice trembled as he explained that his son's wife was not just dead, she had been decapitated. Angie, just 21 years old, had been married to Jared Diaz in a whirlwind ceremony less than 3 months earlier, in October 2022. The couple had been living in a house on Jared's parents' property, seemingly excited about their future together. But that day, everything changed. When Jared's parents went to check on Angie, what they found was unimaginable. Her lifeless body lay on the floor, blood staining the scene. There was no head. Jared's parents, shocked and horrified, immediately called the police, knowing that something unspeakable had happened. Upon arriving at the scene, the first responders were faced with a gruesome crime scene. The house, which had once been a symbol of a young couple's new beginning, was now marked by violence and horror. The body of Angie Diaz, her head severed, lay on the floor. Blood was everywhere, and the knife used to commit the murder was discarded nearby. But it wasn't just the violence of the crime that stunned the officers. It was the proximity to the Diaz family. This was their home, their son's house, and a murder had taken place in the most intimate of spaces. The authorities quickly shifted their focus to Jared, the husband, who was present at the scene. His strange behavior and the unsettling discovery that he had been there when his wife was killed raised immediate suspicions. The once perfect image of a happy couple was shattered, and the investigation into Angie's tragic death was only beginning. Angie Diaz and Jared Diaz had only been married for a few short months, but their relationship, which appeared to be a whirlwind romance, began to show signs of strain even before the tragic day in January. Angie, a bright and ambitious 21-year-old, had met Jared at work, and their connection seemed like the perfect love story. They got married quickly in October 2022, just around the time of Angie's 21st birthday, and on the surface, everything seemed perfect. But there was more beneath the surface. Angie's friends and co-workers began noticing troubling signs not long after the wedding. Angie, who was once cheerful and outgoing, became more withdrawn. At work, she no longer seemed like herself. Her vibrant personality dimmed, and co-workers noticed bruises on her shoulder. When one co-worker asked what had happened, Angie confided that her and Jared had been arguing the night before, and she looked exhausted with dark circles under her eyes. This was a stark contrast to the idealized image of a happy newlywed couple they once shared on social media. Angie's co-workers began to express concern. One of them, Ruth Allandis, considered Angie like a daughter and had grown increasingly worried about her well-being. Something wasn't right, Ruth recalled. Angie had even told her she wanted to talk more about her problems, but had to keep quiet at work because of the constant presence of customers. It became clear that Angie wasn't just dealing with marital disagreements, she was likely in an abusive relationship. Angie had confided to Ruth that Jared had become increasingly possessive and controlling. On one occasion, she even hinted at the idea of leaving him. However, her situation was complicated. Angie had come to the U.S. from Nicaragua with big dreams for her future, and her marriage to Jared seemed like her ticket to stay in the country, avoiding deportation. This pressure may have influenced her decision to marry quickly, despite the growing tensions between them. Jared, a 21-year-old electrician, appeared to be a different person behind closed doors. He had struggled with alcohol and drug use in the past, and his behavior was becoming more erratic. He was arrested for driving while intoxicated in November 2022, just a couple of months after their wedding. This event added to the growing concern among Angie's friends and family about Jared's volatility. Despite their rough start, Angie tried to make the best of her new life with Jared. She worked at a local meat market where she was well-liked by her coworkers and clients. But at home, things were different. Angie's friends noticed that Jared would often visit her workplace, demanding to speak with her constantly. It wasn't just concern for her well-being, it was clear that Angie was increasingly unhappy in her marriage. Her co-workers noticed a change in her demeanor and began to worry that Angie was living in an unsafe environment. While the couple's social media posts painted a picture of perfect happiness, the reality was far more complex and dark. Angie was trapped in a situation where her personal safety was at risk, and her growing unhappiness was clear to those around her. The troubling signs of abuse were there, but Angie was torn between her desire to stay in the U.S. and the escalating tension in her marriage with Jared. On January 11th, 2023, the small, quiet town of Waller County, Texas, was rocked by a crime so horrific that it left the entire community in shock. When police arrived at the scene, they were met with a gruesome sight that no one could have ever prepared for. Jared Diaz's parents had discovered the body of their daughter-in-law, Angie Diaz, in their son's home. What they found was beyond comprehension. Angie's body lay lifeless on the floor, blood soaking the room. Her head had been severed, and the murder weapon, a blood-stained knife, was found discarded nearby. The house, which had once been a place of new beginnings for Jared and Angie, was now a crime scene. Blood was smeared across the floor, and cigarette butts littered the space. The brutality of the attack sent shockwaves through the family, and when the first responders arrived, they knew they were walking into something far darker than a simple accident or medical emergency. As the paramedics approached, they hesitated, not knowing exactly what they were walking into. They were used to emergency situations, but this was different. As they stepped into the room, they saw a towel on the floor and what appeared to be bloodstains. It wasn't long before the horrific truth became clear. This was no accident, and Angie wasn't a patient in need of help. She was dead, brutally murdered, and her body had been left in an unrecognizable state. The medical first responders quickly realized that this was a crime scene, and the police were called. Upon further investigation, officers followed bloody footprints leading from the bedroom to the bathroom. What they discovered in the bathtub was even more chilling. Angie's severed head, a grotesque and unimaginable scene. Jared Diaz, her husband, was on the scene and seemed strangely detached from the situation. He was immediately taken into custody. The police, who had known Jared and his family for years, were left stunned by the brutality of the crime. It seemed that Jared was somehow involved, but the details were unclear. Was he the one who had murdered his wife? If so, what had driven him to commit such an act? As investigators combed through the crime scene, it became evident that Angie had not only been decapitated, but also stabbed multiple times in the back. The violence of the crime pointed to a crime of passion, a brutal act that was more than just a random killing. The officers had no doubt that Jared had played a role in his wife's murder, but the exact motive remained unclear. Jared was taken in for questioning, and his behavior began to raise more suspicions. He was acting strangely, almost too calm for someone whose wife had just been brutally murdered. His inconsistent statements and his lack of emotional response only deepened the mystery surrounding the case. The police had to uncover what had led to this tragic and violent end. As investigators dug deeper into Jared Diaz's background, they uncovered a troubling history that painted a disturbing picture of the young husband. Jared, only 21 years old, had been struggling with substance abuse for years. His family knew about his past issues with alcohol and drugs, but they had no idea the extent to which these problems were affecting him or how they might have played a role in the horrific crime that had just unfolded. In November 2022, just a couple of months after his wedding to Angie, Jared was arrested for driving while intoxicated. The arrest was just the beginning of a string of troubling incidents. According to his family, Jared had a history of volatile behavior, often drinking excessively during his time off, but being mostly functional when it came to work. It was clear that his substance abuse was becoming more problematic, but no one could have anticipated that it would escalate to the point of violence. Jared's older brother Wayne had his own struggles with addiction, particularly with methamphetamine. The Diaz family had dealt with Wayne's issues for years, but Jared's behavior, while concerning, had not raised the same level of alarm. However, in the weeks leading up to Angie's murder, things seemed to have taken a darker turn for Jared. His family began to notice more erratic behavior, including disturbing mood swings and increasing aggression. Jared's actions were becoming more unpredictable, and it was clear that his substance abuse was spiraling out of control. Jared's relationship with Angie was also becoming increasingly strained. Angie had been a strong, independent woman, but the pressure of her marriage to Jared and the potential for deportation seemed to have pushed her into a corner. She had hoped that marrying Jared would provide her with a stable life in the U.S., but it was clear that their relationship was becoming toxic. Despite the outward appearance of a loving marriage, Angie was reportedly unhappy, withdrawn, and even hinted to her friends and coworkers that she was considering leaving Jared. This sense of emotional isolation made Angie more vulnerable, and she found herself trapped in a situation she couldn't escape. In fact, just days before her murder, Angie had confided in her coworkers about the tensions in her marriage. She had shown up to work with bruises on her shoulder and seemed tired, as though she hadn't been sleeping. Angie's co-worker, Ruth Alandis, recalled how Angie had told her that things were bad at home, that she had been arguing with Jared, and that she was feeling trapped. Ruth advised her to leave if things weren't working out, but Angie seemed uncertain about what to do. She wanted to make her marriage work, but was becoming increasingly unhappy with Jared's controlling and aggressive behavior. As the investigation into Angie's death unfolded, the police began to piece together the volatile nature of Jared and Angie's relationship. Jared's substance abuse problems, combined with his controlling behavior, painted a grim picture of the marriage. While Angie's friends and family had hoped that Jared's issues could be overcome, the combination of his erratic actions, Angie's vulnerability, and the toxic dynamics between them ultimately led to a tragic and violent end. The aftermath of Angie Diaz's brutal murder left a deep scar on her family, friends, and the entire community of Magnolia, Texas. Angie's death was a senseless tragedy, one that no one, especially her loved ones, could have anticipated. As the investigation into her death continued, the true horror of what had happened began to unfold, leaving everyone questioning how something so violent could happen in a seemingly normal, quiet community. Angie's family, particularly her mother, was devastated by the loss of a bright young woman with so much potential. Angie had dreams of building a life in the U.S., making a living, and staying close to her family. Her mother, who had been separated from her for years, had hoped that Angie would find happiness in her marriage to Jared. But that dream was shattered in the most brutal way possible. Angie's aunt, who had served as her adoptive mother, reflected on the advice she had given Angie before the marriage, warning her to take her time and not rush into anything. But as was later revealed, Angie had been motivated by her fear of deportation, which led her to marry Jared sooner than she perhaps should have. The Diaz family, already grappling with Jared's troubled past, was left in disbelief that their son was capable of committing such an unspeakable act. Jared's parents were particularly distraught. On the day they found Angie's body, Rodney Diaz, Jared's father, was heard crying in anguish, lamenting how they had tried to help their son through his struggles. The murder of Angie, however, was the breaking point. No one had seen it coming, not even Jared's own family, who had hoped that their son would eventually get better. In the weeks following the murder, as Jared was taken into custody, the police investigation began to piece together the truth behind Angie's death. Jared's strange behavior, the evidence at the crime scene, and his troubled history pointed to a tragic culmination of mental health issues, substance abuse, and domestic violence. Jared had been abusing drugs, and his mental state seemed to deteriorate rapidly before the murder. He admitted during his interrogation that he had heard voices telling him to kill Angie, though his explanations seemed inconsistent and lacked any clear motive. Jared's defense seemed to hinge on the claim that he had been driven to commit the murder under the influence of drugs. But it wasn't just his addiction that had caused the tragedy. It was the combination of his abusive behavior, his mental state, and the immense pressure Angie had been under. The investigation revealed that Angie had been unhappy and felt trapped in her marriage. She had confided in her friends and co-workers about her growing fears. But tragically, it was too late for her to escape. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Jared refused to fully admit his guilt, offering no real remorse for what he had done. The police interview revealed the disturbing contradictions in his statements, and the lack of accountability in his words only added to the chilling nature of the crime. For Angie's family and friends, the loss was incomprehensible. They mourned not only her violent death, but the life that was taken too soon. They reflected on her ambition, her kindness, and the dreams she had for the future. Angie was remembered as a woman who had so much to offer the world, and her death left an indelible mark on all those who knew her. In the end, the murder of Angie Diaz was not just the act of a troubled young man, but a tragedy that involved a series of failures, failed relationships, failed interventions, and a failed system that allowed someone like Jared to continue his descent into violence without enough help or oversight. Angie's story serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of domestic abuse, substance addiction, and the tragic consequences of ignoring the warning signs. As the case moved through the legal system, the community continued to honor Angie's memory, remembering her as a vibrant, hard-working woman whose life was stolen far too soon. Her family found some solace in the support they received from the community, and they vowed to keep her memory alive, hoping that Angie's story would serve as a warning to others in similar situations.